Good morning. We have a special version this morning of the Beatitudes from a child's point of view, a kind of map for disciples. You are blessed when you take time to talk with God, to say thank you or help me or please remember or I am sorry. You're following me when you see something wrong or someone being treated badly and you do something to help. When you see a person or an animal who is lost or homeless or without friends and you and your family help out, you are blessed. When you are hungry for everyone to have enough food to eat, then you are on the right road. When you are thirsty and know that some children need clean water to drink and you save your money to help, you are blessed. When you see a classmate sitting alone and you join them, you're following me. When your heart is open to love others, then you will know what God looks like. When you are a peacemaker, helping people learn how to listen to one another and not fight, you are living like you are God's child. When you see things that aren't good and you work to make them better, you are on the right road. When you try and do these things, you will be blessed and happy.
Well, today we actually finished the Beatitudes. We've looked at all 8 of them individually. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time with the Sermon on the Mount in the coming months. For me, that's always been the center of Christianity, of verses that speak to me like nothing else. I love so many religions and have learned so much that it always feels like home base to me when you get to that place that's known as the Sermon on the Mount. And it's just a real shame that it's been jettisoned by the traditional church in so many ways, where there are people who never preach on actually what Jesus taught, because the church stuff wouldn't work very well. We're looking at a blessing on people that are persecuted. And really for the last 1,500 years, the church has been a lot more likely to be the persecutor than the persecuted. You never know that at the Texas legislature, but it's very true. I think Jesus was trying to call us to a revolution of the spirit and the heart, and I think there are other great teachers that are doing the same thing. And the Beatitudes are an invitation to kind of turn your life upside down. And we'll look at the strands of that, but to place your life at the center and move business stuff to the side, move worries and concerns to the side, because the verse is going to call us to justice, but justice needs to grow out of something that's deeper. If it's not going to go bankrupt, it's not the foundation, it's the fruit. And so the times that we care about ourselves, nature, the world, those are times when we're renewing the source of our concern for other people. I think the Beatitudes are a very strange beginning for a sermon. In that, who's going to like that? Blessed are you if you're poor, you're meek, you're those kinds of things. Those were not popular categories in the ancient world. But wouldn't it be wonderful to find a happiness and a peace that could be there even in the worst of times? As we look at our state and our nation and the world, Many people are simply despairing. I think people are feeling a little more hope than they felt a couple months ago. But any way you look at it, there needs to be a huge rebirth that takes place in this nation. There are people that have been locked out of what we call the American dream since day one. And we're not going to make America great by just focusing on the economy, by circling our wagons and shutting people off, particularly people who we've stole their stuff and they want to come back and look at it from other countries. But can we do that with peace? Can we do that and still have a life of joy? I think that's the gift that Jesus is trying to give us in this passage. What is the difference between happiness and joy? That's one of the themes of the Beatitudes. There are things that make us happy for a time, but make us miserable over time. There are things that people eat, I eat most of them, that are very sweet, but with no vitamin content. And that can make you very happy for a little bit, but at some point there's a reckoning that's there. Or things that are stimulants, but they're not really building up the body, that at some point there's a depletion that's going to happen with that. And that's also true in terms of our inner life and our ethical life. That if we just get excited and respond to what's happening and just jump into what's happening, we can go bankrupt inside. So this is the formula for lifelong activism. And when you read the great activists over history, this was something that they were all very good at. I think in the Beatitudes, what Jesus is trying to do is give us some new assumptions for our life. The first one that I see the Beatitudes saying is our lives do not belong to us, we belong to life. That's sort of the first revolution of the heart and mind. When you're young, you think it's all under your control. When you start getting older, you realize, okay, this body is kind of mine, but it's kind of not. It kind of does what it wants to do sometimes. Life calls you in ways that you would never plan. There are times when you've planned to go a certain direction and your heart just doesn't want to go there because the life within you is needing something more intense, something more engaging. If we forget we're going to die, and I know that's not a happy subject to come up, but think how different our values need to be because we do pass away. When we don't realize it, we think we're piling stuff up, and that's going to be ours in perpetuity. And if you really think about it, that's not what's going to happen. So the Beatitudes are saying your happiness comes from a deeper place than what common sense might seem to be saying. That can give people the false idea that you need to look for pain so you can grow. The symbol of the cross, I think, is a symbol of involuntary suffering, but it's suffering you don't run away from. This is the hymn that we're closing with today, and it has a very disturbing passage. It goes, "By the light of burning martyrs, Christ, your painful path we track." And sometimes there are places and times in history when people have to do that. But most of the time, our suffering is in a milder form, but it's still very important. The hymn goes on to say, "New occasions teach new duties. Time makes ancient good uncouth. They must upward still and onward who would keep abreast of truth." Religion, when it's built in our comfort zones, is going to be a problem at some point. It's like you can't guide your health based on taste alone. I've tried it, I can tell you, it doesn't always work. A lot of the food that your body needs the most doesn't necessarily taste good until you develop a taste for it. And that's also true ethically. When you look at Christians on television, there are wonderful churches all over the country, but when you look on, you turn on television and you see the mega churches, you're looking at dysfunction junction. I mean, you're looking at some really sick stuff. It's ethics built in the comfort zone in so many ways. It's taking the culture and worshiping that and sticking Jesus on as a mascot for the nation, for the economy, and all those kinds of things. So as Jesus begins his ministry, he wants people to know up front, this is going to require a revolution of your heart. But it's a revolution that's going to bring you to life. It's a revolution that will give you peace inside, even as you go into times of fear and suffering. So the first insight we need if we're going to go through a transformation, and that's what the word repentance means. It doesn't mean to feel bad. It means to be transformed. To realize that your life doesn't belong to you. There's a very important sense in which you belong to life. So there's a kind of a crucifixion to your social life, your biological life, and a resurrection into the deeper life that you have. So that's the first, that life doesn't belong to us, we belong to life. And then second, there's a sense in which we don't belong to ourselves, we belong to each other. When I look at the symbol heaven, I think it was a lot more poetic at the beginning. And I think when they pointed to the sky, it was more like a wider horizon than a place where in the clouds where angels sat and played harps and things. When you consider your life to be the web of life, to be a cosmic process, there's a larger sense of life. And I think that's very important. The calling to justice is a calling to our human family, our extended family of plants and animals. It's a larger sense of self. It's a larger sense of worth. It's a larger sense of beauty. And I think that's part of the transformation from the personal life to the large life. I think that's part of the transformation from Jesus to Christ. That Jesus is the person and Christ is the interconnectedness. It's this larger view. One of my favorite people who understood this was Bishop Romero, which you may have heard of. He was a part of the liberation movement. He was killed by American dollars. So that part's not new, where the United States subsidizes the oppression of people around the world. The bishop said, "A church that suffers no persecution, but enjoys the privileges and support of the things of the earth, beware, is not the true church of Jesus Christ. A preaching that does not point out sin," and it's talking about injustice, not moral lapses. "A church that does not point out sin is not the preaching of the gospel. A preaching that makes sinners feel good so that they are secure in their sinful state betrays the gospel's call." Again, it's not sin in the sense of moral or etiquette lapses. This is oppressing people, hurting people, killing people. I've gone to the Texas legislature where the assumption was that Christians are the persecuted ones in this country. I was in a hearing and they were saying this, we got to protect, there's all this persecution. And I said, is there anybody in the room here who's a Christian? Because I know in a hall of power like this, all the Christians are going to be locked out. And of course, everybody in the room was a Christian. And I thought, isn't that interesting? These are the halls of power. These people have gathered to oppress other people and to force Christianity on other people, and yet they see themselves as martyrs. Very, very interesting. A revolution takes place when we realize we belong to each other. Then the third gift, I think, of this beatitude is the circle of life also extends to time. So it includes whatever happens to you. There's a peace of mind that is available even in times of suffering and loss, if we realize that the circle of time includes everything that happens to us. This morning when I was coming here, it's very early, and I look up in the sky, I see Orion, which is a winter constellation, but it's summer. And I thought how in the ancient world that had to be a sign of hope, right? You're looking, it's still summer, but you see that the cooling is going to come and happen at some time. When you watch the weather, there's not a sense that what's happening to you is the weather, right? When you look at all the weather, then you realize it comes and goes. That it's not happening to me. And if I can live in the whole world, then the good and bad things that happen to me are weather. And I can be at peace and at joy, even so. There's a wonderful passage that we sometimes read at the end of our classes by Howard Zinn, and probably a lot of you have read that. Is a hope in the midst of the struggle. He goes, to be hopeful in bad times is based on the fact that human history is not only one of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. I think Jesus is saying that larger life is heaven. And it's something deeper than pain and pleasure. It's something we carry with us always. But we have to realize that life doesn't belong to us. We have to die to that sense of entitlement, and then to realize that we belong to life. And so each moment that we live courageously is a victory. And then to realize that we belong to each other. That there's a sense in which our most important possessions are what we give to each other and what we share. And then finally to realize that when we live in this larger life, this larger connectedness that includes happiness and sadness, victory, defeat, life and death, when we live in the entire circle of life, there's a very important sense that even if we are currently in pain, we're already in heaven. Well, these are my struggles with the Beatitudes. We start next week on the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. Why don't we take a moment for you to think about how you would understand these passages?